Forget the fairy tale about the farmer trading a chicken for some shoes. It never happened. That story is a lie. The real history of money isn't about convenient trade. It's about debt, blood, and trust. From the day the British government accidentally burned down its own parliament with old money to the invisible stone currency sitting at the bottom of the ocean, we are going to show you the world economy's true face. Everything you think you know about money is backward. So, how did we actually get here? We begin with a story you have heard 1,000 times. It is the foundational myth of our economic reality, taught in every high school classroom from London to New York. The story goes like this. In the beginning, before money, there was barter. If you had a chicken and you wanted shoes, you had to find a cobbler who wanted a chicken. Economists call this the double coincidence of wants. It is a clumsy, inefficient dance. And so the story continues. Humanity invented money as a neutral medium of exchange to grease the gears of trade. It is a tidy, logical evolution. Barter led to money, and money led to credit. There is only one problem with this story. According to anthropologists, it never happened. The standard economic history dating back to Adam Smith is backward. When we dig into the archaeological record of the first civilizations, we do not find evidence of a barter economy evolving into cash. We find the exact opposite. We find that debt appeared first, money appeared second, and barter? Barter was largely a desperate measure used between strangers or enemies when the currency system collapsed. To understand the true invention of money, we must look to the bureaucracy of the Sumerian temple. These were not just religious centers, they were the administrative and economic hearts of the city-state. They were the original banks. The Sumerians faced a complex logistical problem. They had thousands of laborers, soldiers, and farmers who needed to be fed and clothed. The temple needed a way to track resources. They didn't need coins to trade in a market. They needed a system of accounting to manage the distribution of goods. This is the origin of the shekel. It was not originally a silver coin. It was a weight measure. 1 shekel was equivalent to 180 grains of barley. This wasn't an arbitrary number. 180 grains was roughly the daily ration required to sustain a human life. Money, in its earliest form, was a measurement of survival. But barley is heavy, perishable, and difficult to transport. The temple bureaucrats needed a more durable unit of account for their ledgers. So, they established a bimetallic standard. They decreed that 1 shekel of silver was equal in value to 1 gur, about 300 liters, of barley. This is a crucial distinction. The silver didn't circulate. It sat in the temple vaults, guarded and unmoving. The money was the accounting system itself. People transacted in credit. You would go to the alehouse, drink a beer, and the alewife would put it on your tab. At harvest time, you would pay your tab in barley, which the alewife would then use to pay her debt to the temple. But this system had a dark underbelly. The invention of debt brought with it the invention of interest. And in Sumer, interest was punitive. The official rates were set by law, 20% for loans of silver, but a staggering 33% for loans of barley. If a harvest failed, a farmer could not pay his barley debt. But the debt did not vanish. It grew. With 33% interest, a debt could double in 3 years. This mathematics of compound interest quickly collided with the biological reality of agriculture. The barley didn't grow as fast as the debt. The result was debt peonage. When farmers could not pay in grain, they were forced to pay in flesh. They pledged their family members' wives, sons, daughters as bondservants to the creditors. The first market was not a market for shoes or chickens. It was a market for human labor, driven by the terrifying power of the debt ledger. The social pressure of debt threatened to tear Sumerian society apart. If the entire peasantry became enslaved to the creditors, there would be no one left to serve in the army or maintain the irrigation canals. The kings understood this danger. To preserve their kingdom, they had to destroy the economy. Upon ascending the throne, a new ruler would issue a clean slate decree. In the Assyrian tradition, this was sometimes called washing the tablets, literally dissolving the clay records of debt in water. In other instances, the tablets were smashed. The Sumerians had a word for this moment, amarge. It is the first recorded word for freedom in human history. Its literal translation is return to mother, signifying that debt peons were free to return to their families. The slate was wiped clean. This ancient mechanism of periodic debt cancellation is the ancestor of the biblical jubilee. So the history of money begins not with the freedom to trade, but with the crushing weight of obligation and the state's periodic intervention to shatter the very system it created. For thousands of years, money was a ledger. It was accounting. But around 600 BC, on the Anatolian plateau in the kingdom of Lydia, money transformed into a physical object. The rivers of Lydia were rich in electrum, a natural alloy of gold and silver. But trading with raw electrum was difficult. The ratio of gold to silver varied in every nugget. You had to weigh and assay every single piece to know its value. It was high-friction commerce. The Lydian kings, Alyattes, and his famous son Croesus introduced a revolutionary technology, the state-guaranteed coin. They refined the electrum to a consistent weight and purity, and then stamped it with the royal seal, the Lydian lion. This stamp changed the nature of value. You no longer had to trust the metal, you trusted the king. The coin was worth what the king said it was worth. But why did they invent coins? Conventional wisdom says it was to help merchants trade, but historical evidence suggests a more violent motivation. Lydia and the rising Greek city-states relied heavily on mercenaries. A mercenary soldier is a stranger. He has no ties to the local community. He does not want a credit tab at the local tavern. He wants something portable, valuable, and universally accepted. The state minted coins to pay the soldiers. The soldiers spent the coins in the local markets for food and supplies. The state then demanded that the population pay their taxes in these specific coins. This closed the loop. It forced the population to support the army. To pay your tax, you had to acquire coins. To acquire coins, you had to sell goods to the soldiers. Money was not born from peace. It was the logistical engine of ancient warfare. While the West was fighting over gold and silver, the East was encountering a different problem: the weight of money. In Tang Dynasty China, the primary currency was the copper cash coin. Low value, heavy weight. To buy a large shipment of tea or silk, a merchant might need to transport wagon loads of coins. It was dangerous, slow, and exhausting. To solve this, merchants and the government developed a system called Fiat flying cash. The name was poetic but literal. The paper certificates were so light they could fly away in the breeze. Initially, this was just a money transfer service. A merchant would deposit coins in the capital and receive a certificate. He could then travel to a distant province and redeem the certificate for cash at a local provincial office. The system required trust. How could you prevent counterfeiting in the 9th century? They used a method of verification called the chirograph, or matching tally. The paper note would be torn or cut in a specific, jagged pattern. The local office kept one half, the merchant kept the other. When the merchant arrived to redeem his money, the two halves had to match perfectly. If the tear line didn't align, the money wasn't paid. By the Song dynasty, this evolved into true paper currency, the jiaozi. Unlike flying cash, which was just a receipt, jiaozi circulated as money itself. The Song government established the first state-run factories for printing money. They understood the danger of counterfeiting, so they employed multiple security layers. But paper wasn't trusted everywhere. On the fringes of the empire in Siberia, Mongolia, and Tibet, money needed to be useful. Enter the tea brick. These were blocks of tea leaves, compressed under high pressure into bricks. They were scored on the back, like a chocolate bar, so you could break off small chunks for change. The tea brick was a masterpiece of functional currency. It was durable, transportable, and held intrinsic value. If the economy collapsed, you couldn't eat gold, but you could boil your money to stay alive. While China was printing paper, medieval Europe was running on wood. For over 700 years, the British Exchequer used tally sticks to record tax payments and debts. The system was elegant in its simplicity. Notches representing the amount of money were cut into a hazelwood stick. The stick was then split lengthwise. One half, the stock, was given to the creditor. This is the origin of the term stock market and stockholder. The other half, the foil, was kept by the debtor, the exchequer. To prove a debt was paid, the two pieces had to be joined. The grain of the wood served as a unique fingerprint that was impossible to forge. Money is only as good as the trust in the sovereign. And in the 1540s, King Henry VIII betrayed that trust. Desperate to fund his lavish wars and lifestyle, Henry began the Great Debasement. He secretly ordered the mint to reduce the silver content of the coinage, replacing it with cheap copper. The new coins looked silver when they were minted. But the portrait of the king had a prominent nose, the highest point on the relief. As the coins circulated and rubbed against each other in pockets, the thin silver layer wore off the nose first, revealing the red copper beneath. His subjects, poor and cheated, gave him a nickname that stuck for centuries: Old Copper Nose. This disaster illustrated what would later be known as Gresham's Law. Bad money drives out good. When Henry flooded the market with copper junk, people hoarded the old, real silver coins. The good money disappeared from circulation, leaving only the debased trash. The era of the tally stick ended in a literal blaze of glory. By 1834, the British Exchequer had finally modernized. They were left with centuries' worth of obsolete wooden tally sticks, 2 cartloads of them. The Clerk of Works decided to dispose of them by burning them in the furnaces beneath the House of Lords. It was a fatal miscalculation. The dry, seasoned wood burned with a ferocious intensity. The heat melted the copper flue linings and ignited the structural timbers of the palace. The fire raged all night. It destroyed the House of Lords, the House of Commons, and the Painted Chamber. The British government had literally burned down its own seat of power with its old money. France was bankrupt. Louis XIV had died, leaving behind a mountain of debt. The economy was strangled by a lack of gold and silver coins. Enter John Law, a Scotsman, a gambler, a mathematician, and a convicted murderer who had escaped prison in London. Law believed that money was not a fixed store of value like gold, but a tool of exchange that should be elastic. He famously said, "Money is not the value for which goods are exchanged, but the value by which they are exchanged." Law established the Banque Générale and the Mississippi Company. He secured a monopoly on trade with French Louisiana, a vast territory in North America that was rumored to be filled with gold. He used the bank to print paper money, which people used to buy shares in the company. It was a feedback loop of infinite leverage. The share price skyrocketed. 500 livres, 5,000 livres, 10,000 livres. The hysteria on the Rue Quincampoix was so intense that business was conducted in the street. A famous anecdote from the time tells of a hunchbacked man who made a small fortune by renting out his hump as a writing desk for speculators to sign their contracts. But the gold in Mississippi was a lie. There were only swamps. Smart investors began to cash out, demanding gold for their paper notes. But Law had printed far more paper than there was gold in the vaults. Confidence evaporated. The Mississippi bubble burst. Law, once the wealthiest man in Europe, was forced to flee France in disgrace. The French economy was devastated, leaving a deep scar of distrust towards paper money that would last for generations. While John Law was proving how fragile paper money could be, the people of Yap were demonstrating the power of the distributed ledger. Their money was the rye-stone. These were massive limestone discs, quarried hundreds of miles away in Palau and rafted back across the ocean. Because the stones were too heavy to move for every transaction, they didn't move. They stayed in place. When a stone changed owners, the transaction was publicly announced. The entire village mentally updated the ledger of who owned what. The ultimate proof of this system's abstraction is the legend of the sinking stone. One family's massive ray stone was lost at sea during a storm. It sank to the bottom of the Pacific, never to be seen again. But the village elders decided that since the stone did exist, and its loss was not the owner's fault, its value remained. For generations, the family traded the ownership of this invisible stone sitting at the bottom of the ocean. They were trading fiat, value, based purely on decree and consensus, centuries before modern central banking. But the rye stones also taught a lesson about inflation. In 1871, an Irish-American captain named David O'Keefe shipwrecked on Yap. He saw the value the natives placed on the stones. He went to Palau, used modern iron tools and dynamite to quarry hundreds of stones quickly, and brought them back to Yap to trade for coconut oil. But the village elders were smart. They decreed that O'Keefe's stones were too easy. They lacked the sweat and struggle of the traditional stones. They were devalued. It was a primitive version of quantitative easing. When money becomes too easy to create, it loses its meaning. For most of history, money tried to anchor itself to something physical: barley, silver, gold. That ended on August 15, 1971. President Richard Nixon, facing a run on the US gold reserves, gathered his economic team at Camp David. In a secret, high-stakes meeting, they decided to sever the link between the US dollar and gold. So, what is the untold story of money? It is not a story of trading chickens for shoes. It is a story of trust. Trust in the temple's ledger, trust in the king's stamp, trust in the emperor's seal, trust in the wood grain of a stick, trust in a stone you cannot see. Money is the social technology we invented to collaborate with strangers. It is a shared fiction that allows civilization to function. From the clay tablets of Sumer to the digital ledgers of today, the form changes, but the foundation remains the same. We are not trading matter, we are trading promises. Hopefully, the economy looks a little less like magic and a little more like history now. Drop a like if you learned something new, and subscribe so you don't miss out on our next explanation of the complex world we live in. Thanks for your time. See you in the next video.